Picture this: your fingers brush against a crumbling, yellowed parchment tucked away in the corner of a forgotten archive. The delicate fibers crackle under your touch, whispering secrets from a world long vanished. As you carefully unfurl it, the intricate lines and faded ink reveal something extraordinary, not just a map, but a silent witness to a hidden web of trade, power, and espionage that shaped the medieval world. This isn't just a relic of geography, it's a coded message, a strategic blueprint used by merchants, spies, and rulers to navigate a shadowy landscape of alliances and betrayals. Today, we're pulling back the veil on one of history's most fascinating discoveries, a medieval map that rewrites everything we thought we knew about how commerce and covert operations intertwined in the Middle Ages. What makes this map so remarkable isn't just its age or craftsmanship, it's the stories it tells. Beneath its surface, you'll find routes that don't appear in any official record, connections between cities that historians never suspected, and subtle markings that hint at clandestine meetings and smuggled goods. This was more than a guide for travelers. It was a tool of control, a way for powerful players to manipulate trade, gather intelligence, and outmaneuver their rivals. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a spy's handbook, disguised as an ordinary navigational aid. And the most thrilling part, this map forces us to question what we've been taught about how medieval societies really functioned. So how did something so significant vanish for centuries? Who used it, and what were they trying to hide? As we piece together the clues left behind, you'll see how cartography was far from a neutral science. It was a weapon, a way to consolidate power and keep secrets. From bustling market towns to remote monasteries, this map reveals a world where every line drawn could mean the difference between wealth and ruin, between peace and war. By the time we're done, you'll never look at the Middle Ages the same way again. Ready to uncover the truth? Let's begin. The historian working in that dimly lit monastery archive nearly missed it. A slender roll of vellum, its edges frayed with age, wedged between two bulky liturgical texts. At first glance, it seemed like just another devotional manuscript, but as the light caught its surface, the telltale lines of coastlines and rivers emerged. This was no ordinary map. The handwriting varied wildly, as if multiple hands had contributed over time, adding layers of annotations in Latin, Arabic, and even Old Norse. Some passages were deliberately smudged, as though someone had tried to obscure them. Others bore strange symbols, a crescent moon here, a dagger sketched in the margin there, hinting at a purpose far beyond navigation. Carbon dating confirmed the map's origins to the late 13th century, a period when Europe's trade networks stretched from the spice markets of Alexandria to the wool fairs of Flanders. But this map didn't just chart well-traveled merchant roads. It revealed alternate paths, narrow mountain passes, unmarked river fords, even underground tunnels beneath bustling cities. These weren't shortcuts for honest traders. They were escape routes, smuggling corridors, and clandestine meeting points. One particularly telling detail: a tiny, almost invisible notation near the port of Genoa, "Silentium aurum," silence is golden. This wasn't just practical advice, it was a warning. Why go to such lengths to hide a simple map? Because in the wrong hands, this parchment was explosive. It exposed the hidden arteries of medieval power, the backroom deals between merchant guilds and crown officials, the secret alliances between rival city-states, even the discreet movement of spies disguised as pilgrims. Most maps of the era were propaganda tools, glorifying a ruler's domain or reinforcing religious dogma. This one told the messy, unfiltered truth. No wonder so many similar documents were burned. Surviving meant being forgotten until now. The real mystery isn't just what the map shows, but who risked their life to preserve it. Was it a monk smuggling knowledge out of a besieged library? A disgraced diplomat hedging his bets? Whoever they were, they left behind a puzzle, one that forces us to rethink how medieval elites really controlled their world. Because if this map teaches us anything, it's that the greatest power wasn't in castles or armies. It was in knowing the roads no one else could see. At first glance, the serpent and dagger symbol might seem like mere decorative flair, a cartographer's whimsy. But when you find it etched beside a remote alpine pass or tucked into the corner of a bustling port city, a pattern emerges. This wasn't artistry, it was a lifeline. Researchers cross-referencing medieval ledgers and guild records discovered something startling. The serpent and dagger motif appeared in the same years and places as a shadowy brotherhood known as the Ophidian Guard. These were no ordinary mercenaries, hired by merchant consortiums to protect high-value cargoes, silks, spices, even holy relics. They operated under a brutal code. Any threat to their shipments vanished without a trace. The map's symbols weren't just marking locations, they were warning signs. A trader seeing that serpent knew exactly which routes came with protection and which dangers lurked for the uninitiated. Then there are the crosses, not the tidy red ink marking churches or pilgrimage sites, but small, uneven marks in brownish pigment like rust or dried blood. Some cluster near borderlands, others dot the edges of wealthy cities. One scholar noticed they aligned almost perfectly with the locations of medieval hostels run by the Order of St. Lazarus, a monastic group rumored to shelter fugitives and gather intelligence. A coincidence unlikely. These crosses may have flagged safe houses where spies could rest, resupply, or pass messages under the guise of religious travel. Imagine a courier fleeing with stolen trade secrets, scanning the map for the nearest cross, not salvation, but survival. But the most tantalizing clues lie in the inverted compass roses. Normally, these ornate stars pointed travelers north. Here, they're flipped upside down or skewed at odd angles, often near unremarkable stretches of coastline or forest. Maritime archaeologists recently tested a theory. These false roses marked illicit landing sites where goods could be smuggled past customs officials. One such spot near Marseille matched the location of a sunken 13th century ship packed with untaxed Venetian glass. The map's creators weren't just guiding users, they were helping them cheat. And then there's the cipher, scattered phrases like aqua non potest, water cannot, or nox sign loose, night without light, seem nonsensical until you realize their mnemonics. Say them aloud in a busy tavern, and you might get a discreet nod toward a hidden cellar door. These weren't directions, they were passphrases, verifying a traveler's trustworthiness. The map's genius was its layers, visible enough to be useful, cryptic enough to be deniable. To a king's tax collector, it looked mundane. To a smuggler or spy, it was the difference between prosperity and the gallows. What's chilling is how few hands this knowledge touched. The blend of Latin and cipher suggests an inner circle, perhaps a guild master's inner council or a broker who traded in secrets as much as goods. This wasn't a map for the many, it was a weapon for the few who knew how to wield it, and that's the real revelation. In an age we think of as simple or unconnected, information was already the ultimate currency. The parchment didn't just depict roads and rivers, it plotted the invisible threads of influence that stitched the medieval world together, threads someone risked everything to keep from fraying. Now consider this, if such a map existed, how many others were destroyed? And what did they know that we never will? Consider the bustling port of Bruges in the 14th century, on the surface, a hub of legitimate commerce where Flemish wool met Venetian gold. But beneath that orderly facade, a different game unfolded. The map we've been deciphering exposes a network of canals and alleyways where bales of English wool slipped past customs, untaxed and unrecorded. These weren't accidents, they were calculated maneuvers in a high-stakes chess match between merchant guilds. One particularly damning annotation near Antwerp reads, "Argentum mutum, silver stays silent," a clear nod to bribes ensuring shipments moved unchecked. The real genius of these alternate routes, they exploited geography like a military strategist. Take the winding path marked through the Black Forest, a detour adding days to a journey, but avoiding the chokehold of the Rhine toll castles. For every ducat saved in bribes or dodged tariffs, a rival city's coffers bled dry, and the map's creators knew exactly where to strike. Faint red lines crisscrossing the Alps don't just indicate mountain passes, they mark where guards could be persuaded to look the other way. This wasn't just evasion, it was economic sabotage, but the most ruthless trick, the decoys. A lavish, gold-inked route leading to Milan appears flawless until you notice the microscopic dots along its edges. Cross-referencing these with contemporary chronicles reveals they correspond to bandit attacks on merchant caravans in the exact same spots. Coincidence? Hardly. This was corporate warfare, medieval style, luring competitors into traps while your own goods moved safely through unmarked trails. The parallels to today are uncanny. Swap parchment for servers, and these tactics mirror modern trade secrets, theft or tariff circumvention. A 14th century merchant bribing a harbor master isn't so different from a corporation exploiting tax havens. The map forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Globalization's cutthroat rules didn't start with container ships or sanctions. They were forged in the ink of documents like this, documents that prove commerce has always been a contact sport. Yet the map's greatest revelation isn't the greed or deception, it's the sheer innovation. These merchants didn't just bend the rules, they rewrote them, crafting an entire shadow economy. When Genoa's officials cracked down on spice smuggling, the map's users simply shifted to disguised shipments, pepper sacks labeled as low-value grain, cinnamon hidden in wax seals. Every crackdown bred a workaround, a testament to human ingenuity's dark edge. So what's left for us to uncover? Perhaps the ultimate irony. Many of these illicit routes became formal trade lanes centuries later, legitimized by the very powers that once hunted their users. The Black Forest detours evolved into protected merchant highways. Those bandit-plagued paths are now scenic tourist trails. History, it seems, has a way of laundering its own dirty secrets. The question isn't just how these traders gamed the system, but why we ever believed the game was fair to begin with. Who really held the reins of this clandestine cartographic masterpiece? The answer lies not in a single hand, but in the fingerprints, literally. Traces of vermilion and gold leaf embedded in the parchment's fibers suggest it was consulted in opulent chambers, far from the grime of merchant stalls. One compelling clue, a nearly erased coat of arms in the corner, its outlines matching the heraldry of the Hanseatic League's inner council. This wasn't some back-alley smuggler's scribble. It was a boardroom asset wielded by the equivalent of medieval corporate titans. The Hanseatic theory fits like a lockpick. By the late 13th century, this coalition of German merchants dominated Baltic trade with an iron grip, fixing prices and blockading ports to crush competitors. Imagine their advantage if they alone knew which mountain passes lacked imperial tolls, or which coastal watchtowers could be bypassed under fog. A single notation on this map, Ventus Amicus, the wind is friendly, appears beside 3 key harbors where Hanseatic ships consistently arrived ahead of rivals. Coincidence or proof they had insider knowledge of seasonal currents? But there's a twist. Fold marks near the Iberian Peninsula hint at another possible owner, the court of Alfonso X of Castile, a king obsessed with both astronomy and espionage. His scholars compiled the Libro del Saber, an encyclopedia mapping everything from constellations to siege engines. What if this was its shadow counterpart, a guide to the earthly machinations behind his wars? The map's annotations near Granada align eerily with his campaigns against the Moors, suggesting routes for moving troops disguised as spice caravans. Then there's the where. The vellum is thinnest along the Rhine Valley, where dozens of tiny pinpricks indicate frequent marking and erasure. This wasn't casual consultation, it was active strategy. Merchants didn't need daily updates on river tolls, but generals did. During the Swiss uprisings of the early 14th century, Habsburg commanders struggled to move supplies through the very passes this map highlights in bold strokes. Someone was playing both sides, leasing routes to the highest bidder. The most telling detail, the ink, spectral analysis reveals traces of mercury, a costly pigment reserved for royal decrees. Yet the handwriting varies from elegant Latin to hurried Gothic script, as if passed between scribes and spies in equal measure. This duality captures the map's true purpose, a hybrid tool for commerce and conquest. Whether held by a merchant prince or a war king, its power came from asymmetry, knowing what others didn't, and that's what makes its survival so remarkable. In an age when knowledge was power, why wasn't it burned? Perhaps because its creators knew the greatest secrets aren't those you destroy, but those you let slip at the right moment. A single parchment could fracture alliances, bankrupt cities, or spark rebellions, if placed in the right hands or the wrong ones. The most skilled spies of the Middle Ages didn't slink through shadows or scale castle walls. They hid in plain sight. That's the genius of the system this map exposes. Take the innocuous-looking pilgrim routes winding through northern France. At first glance, they follow the well-trodden paths to Santiago de Compostela. But look closer. Tiny, deliberate detours avoid towns with heavy guard presence, veering instead toward remote monasteries. These weren't holy sites, they were dead drops. Records from the Abbey of Cluny confirm monks receiving penitents who left sealed wax tablets tucked into prayer books, later collected by entirely different travelers. The map's symbols near these stops, a stylized eye with a slash through it, weren't warnings. They were invitations. Then there were the silent watchers. Scattered along coastal trade hubs like Barcelona and Constantinople, these informants didn't need elaborate codes. Their weapon was mundanity. A fishmonger tallying herring barrels might note which merchant's ship carried extra anchors, a telltale sign of smuggled weapons. A wool inspector's routine measurements could conceal folded vellum scraps detailing troop movements. The map's margin notes reference these agents with chilling simplicity. Oculi piscium, eyes of the fish, a pun on their ability to see everything while appearing harmless. But the real stroke of brilliance, the spice loophole. Medieval customs officials obsessed over pepper and saffron, high-value goods easily taxed. Yet the map marks alternate routes where lowly goods like dried peas or salt moved unchecked. Perfect cover. A spy could travel as a humble salt trader, his cargo barrels hollowed to hide stolen seals or intercepted letters. One recovered account from Venice describes a salt cellar whose barrels, when emptied, left behind traces of scarlet wax, the exact color used by the papal chancery. The system's elegance lay in its deniability. Unlike modern spies burdened with gadgets, these agents blended into society's fabric. A minstrel singing in a lord's hall wasn't just entertainment. His ballad stanzas might encode which noble was plotting rebellion. The map even hints at this, with musical notes scribbled near castles where troubadours were known to visit. No technology required, just human ingenuity. Yet the greatest advantage was patience. A merchant's apprentice planted in a rival city might take decades to rise to a position of trust, but once he did, the intelligence flowed like wine. The map's long-dismissed family trees near major trading houses now make sense. They weren't genealogies, but sleeper agent lineages, generations of loyalty, all for one moment of betrayal. This was espionage stripped to its essence, not brute force, but the subtle art of making people see exactly what you wanted them to see, and the map. It wasn't just a tool. It was the ultimate testament to a truth as old as time. The quietest whispers change history far more than the loudest battles. The most fascinating parts of this map might be the blank spaces, the cities that should be there but aren't. Take Paris, for example. By the 13th century, it was already a thriving capital, a hub of trade and politics. Yet on this parchment, nothing, not even a faint outline. The omission feels deliberate, almost pointed. Was it to divert rival merchants away from lucrative markets? Or something darker? Scroll further east, and another glaring absence appears, the Cathar strongholds of southern France. These were towns under siege during the Albigensian Crusade, their very existence a threat to the Church. Erasing them from the map wasn't just censorship, it was denial, as if wiping them from history itself. Then there's the mystery of the missing mines. Medieval Europe's wealth flowed from silver and salt pits, yet the map skirts entire regions rich in these resources. One particularly telling gap, the Erzgebirge Mountains, where Saxon miners hauled fortunes in silver from the earth. Their absence can't be ignorance. Contemporary texts rave about the metal rivers beneath those hills. More likely, it was protection. Silver shipments were magnets for bandits and for kings desperate to tax them. Leaving the mines off the map kept them off royal radar too. But the most chilling omissions aren't places, they're people. The bustling Jewish quarters of cities like Mainz and Toledo, vital to medieval finance and medicine, vanish without a trace. In an era when pogroms could erupt overnight, was this cartographic invisibility a twisted form of safety or complicity? The pattern is too consistent to dismiss. Where persecution flared, the map falls silent. Yet not all blanks were acts of fear. Some were weapons. The absence of certain Alpine passes coincides exactly with territories controlled by the Duke of Austria, a ruler infamous for imposing brutal tolls. Redirecting traffic through unmarked trails wouldn't just save merchants' coin, it would starve the Duke's coffers. This wasn't forgetfulness, it was economic warfare inked onto parchment. The real question isn't just what's missing, but who benefited. A monk's map would glorify pilgrimage sites. A king's would flaunt his domains, this one. It serves the shadow brokers, the ones who profited from chaos, who needed rivals lost and resources hidden. Every blank space is a clue, a calculated silence shouting louder than any marking. Because in the end, the secrets medieval power players guarded most fiercely weren't the roads they built. It was the ones they made sure you'd never find. The Hereford Mappa Mundi sprawls with dragons and biblical scenes, its edges crowded with the imagined wonders of a world still half unknown. The Catalan Atlas glitters with gold leaf, placing Jerusalem at the center of creation like a divine jewel. But this forgotten map, it's stripped bare of all that myth and majesty. No sea monsters lurk in its margins, no Garden of Eden marks its east. Instead, you'll find something far more radical for its time: cold, calculating precision. The coastlines align almost eerily with modern satellite surveys, and the distances between trading hubs are accurate to within a few miles. an unthinkable feat for an era when most maps were more sermon than science. This obsession with practicality reveals a startling truth. Whoever crafted this document wasn't interested in saving souls or flattering kings. They were solving problems. Take the river systems. Most medieval maps depicted them as vague, wavy lines, if they bothered at all. Here, every tributary is meticulously plotted, with annotations noting seasonal depth changes vital for transporting heavy cargo. Even more telling, the mountain passes. While the Hereford mapper Mundy sketched the Alps as a jagged afterthought, this map marks the exact weeks each year they were traversable, accounting for snowmelt patterns. This wasn't guesswork, it was data collected by someone who understood that geography wasn't just about where things were, but when and how they could be used. So where did this knowledge come from? The clues point east. Hidden among the Latin abbreviations are Arabic terms like Rub al-Muqaddar for measured distances, suggesting the cartographer had access to Islamic surveying manuals. Even more compelling are the star charts faintly visible under ultraviolet light, not the familiar European constellations, but the lunar mansions used by Arab navigators. This was no accident. At a time when Christian scholars dismissed Muslim science as heretical, someone was quietly merging the best of both worlds to create a tool of unparalleled utility. Yet the map's greatest rebellion isn't in what it includes, it's what it rejects. Most medieval maps served as moral allegories, with paradise at the top and hellish voids below. This one, it's ruthlessly horizontal, orienting not to salvation but to profit. Trade winds replace angels' wings, safe harbors outrank holy sites. The message is clear: in this world, the divine matters less than the dinar. That pragmatism may explain its ghostly influence. Later Portolan charts, the practical maps used by Renaissance sailors, suddenly adopt its crisp coastal profiles and scale markings in the 14th century, as if someone had leaked a trade secret. But the real legacy lies in the blanks. The deliberate omissions of certain cities and routes created shadow highways that endured for centuries, shaping economies in ways their makers could never have imagined. Because the most powerful maps aren't those that depict the world as it is but as someone needs it to be. The medieval world wasn't just shaped by kings and castles, it was built on the silent, relentless flow of silver and spices. And this map, it was the cheat code. Every hidden route, every smuggler's detour siphoned wealth away from the official coffers and into private hands. Take the salt trade, for example. In an era where salt was literally worth its weight in gold, the map reveals a web of unmarked trails skirting the king's toll stations in the Alps. A single convoy avoiding taxes could mean the difference between a duke's lavish feast and his army going unpaid. But the real shock isn't just the evasion, it's the scale. One annotation near Lübeck mentions a silent fair, where Baltic herring changed hands without a single tax collector present. Cross-referencing guild ledgers shows these shadow markets moved enough goods to bankrupt small principalities. When the Count of Flanders raised tariffs in the 13th century, the map's users simply rerouted Flemish wool through a chain of coastal caves, cutting him out entirely. The result, his treasury collapsed within a decade, while a handful of merchant families amassed fortunes rivaling crowns. What's chilling is how modern this all feels. Those alpine smuggling routes, they mirror today's shell companies funneling wealth through Luxembourg or the Cayman Islands. The silent fairs are the medieval equivalent of dark web marketplaces, unregulated, untraceable, and devastating to those left playing by the rules. Even the tactics are eerily familiar. Just as modern corporations exploit legal gray areas, medieval merchants used religious pilgrimages as cover for moving untaxed goods. A penitent carrying a sack of pepper was off limits to inspectors, a loophole the map's users exploited ruthlessly. Yet the most ingenious trick was their decentralized system. Unlike modern tax havens reliant on bankers and lawyers, this shadow economy thrived without any central hub. A boatmaster in Genoa might never meet the wool trader in Bruges, but thanks to the map's coded marks, they operated in perfect sync. Each player knew only their piece of the puzzle, making the network virtually indestructible. Raid one smuggling ring and 3 more would sprout like weeds. The lesson here isn't just about greed, it's about power. For every king struggling to fund his wars, there was a merchant guild turning his own roads against him. The map doesn't just show hidden paths, it reveals the fractures in the medieval world order, where wealth and influence flowed through cracks no crown could seal. And in those cracks, you'll find the untold story of who really ruled the Middle Ages, not with swords, but with ledgers and loopholes. So when we trace today's offshore accounts and shadow markets, we're not seeing some modern corruption. We're witnessing the same game played with older pieces. The board has changed, but the rules, they were written in ink like this. Among the map's most tantalizing features are the cryptic phrases scrawled in its margins, lines that at first glance seem like random scribbles or pious invocations. But look closer and a pattern emerges. Near the borders of war-torn Lombardy, the same odd phrase appears twice. Aquila non capit muscas, literally, the eagle does not catch flies. A proverb, perhaps not quite. Cross-referencing papal archives reveals this was the personal motto of a shadowy figure, Benedetto Supino, a Venetian cryptographer whose services were rented out to the highest bidder, including the Pope himself. This wasn't just a saying, it was a signature, a way to mark territory or a warning. The Ciphers' design is devilishly clever for its time. Unlike the simple substitution codes common in medieval manuscripts, this one layers multiple techniques. Some words are reversed, silentium becomes muintoles, or while others borrow from Greek abbreviations used in Byzantine trade ledgers, but the real stroke of genius. The spacing, certain letters are minutely distanced from their neighbors, forming an acrostic when read vertically. One such column near the Pyrenees spells out Navarra, hinting at a clandestine deal between Castile and the Kingdom of Navarre during a truce that officially never existed. What were they hiding? The map's most densely annotated region, the Adriatic coast, holds a clue. Here, the cipher shifts to a numerical system matching account books from Venice's Council of 10, the notorious secret ruling body. One recurring sequence, Roman 12, Roman 7, Roman 4, aligns with dates of ambushed Genoese convoys, suggesting the map's owners weren't just observing conflicts, they were orchestrating them. Even more chilling are the symbols resembling musical notes near Constantinople. Deciphered, they correspond to the cadence of Ottoman military drums, intelligence that would have been priceless during the Crusades. Yet the map's true cryptographic masterpiece isn't in its complexity, but its deniability. Many phrases double as legitimate trade notations. Funis ruptus could mean broken rope to a dockworker, but to an initiate, it signaled a compromised smuggling route. This duality made the map untouchable, too valuable to destroy, too dangerous to display. Even if intercepted, it could pass as a merchant's mundane tool while whispering secrets to those who held the key. And that key might still be out there. In a dusty corner of the Vatican's secret archives, a ledger from the early 14th century lists payments to Supino for the silent work of Saint Mark, likely a reference to Venice's patron saint. Could this be the Ciphers' Rosetta Stone? Until it's found, we're left with fragments of a puzzle that might rewrite our understanding of medieval diplomacy, one where maps weren't just guides, but active players in a game of encrypted power. The map shatters the illusion of medieval trade as a neat, orderly system governed by kings and guilds. What we've been taught was a carefully regulated network of sanctioned routes and tariffs was, in truth, a free-for-all, a shadowy parallel economy where smugglers and spies moved faster than any crown's tax collectors. Take the so-called Silk Road of textbooks, a single, romanticized artery of commerce linking east and west. This map laughs at that simplicity. It reveals a tangle of alternate paths, some so narrow they could only fit a single mule where silk, spices, and secrets flowed under the radar. One such trail, skirting the Caspian Sea, avoids every major checkpoint mentioned in official caravan logs. Yet pottery fragments and Byzantine coins found along that route prove it was heavily used. How many other non-existent roads were bustling with life? Even more startling are the dates. Several routes on this parchment appear to predate recorded explorations by decades. A path through the Caucasus Mountains, for example, matches descriptions of a phantom trail mentioned in Armenian merchant complaints from the 11th century, long before Marco Polo's famed journeys. Could this mean entire chapters of medieval exploration have been erased? The implications are staggering. If traders were traversing these regions earlier than believed, it rewrites not just trade history, but the spread of ideas, technology, even disease. The Black Death's terrifying speed across Europe makes gruesome new sense if its carriers were using these hidden corridors. Then there's the power shift. The map's annotations near Acre, a Crusader stronghold, tell a damning story. While kings and bishops wrangled over Holy Land, the real control belonged to the ones who kept the supply lines open. A tiny notation beside a coastal cave reads, "Fermentum pro aurum," grain for gold, exposing how Crusader armies relied on black market networks to avoid starvation. No wonder the Knights Templar, ostensibly warrior monks, became master logisticians. They weren't just fighting infidels, they were playing both sides of a shadow economy that kept the wars going. But the most explosive revelation, the Mongol connections. Conventional history paints the Mongol Empire as an unstoppable force that reshaped trade by brute conquest. This map suggests a darker symbiosis. Certain routes through the steppes bear markings in Aigha script, a language used by Mongol administrators, yet they're labeled with European merchant symbols too. The chilling conclusion: some European traders may have secretly collaborated with the Mongols, feeding them intelligence about rival cities in exchange for safe passage. One such route leads straight to the gates of Kiev, years before its infamous destruction. Was the Mongol terror partly enabled by insider betrayal? What other lies have we swallowed? The map's existence forces us to question everything from the rise of banking families like the Medicis. Did their wealth really start with honest trade? To the fall of Byzantine outposts, were they lost to battle or economic strangulation? Because the truth is now undeniable. The medieval world wasn't ruled by thrones or faith alone. It was shaped in the quiet moments when a merchant glanced at a hidden map, chose an unmarked path, and changed history without anyone ever knowing. The parchment itself is a marvel of medieval ingenuity, thinner than most liturgical texts, yet astonishingly resilient, having survived centuries of handling without fully disintegrating. Modern conservators were stunned to find traces of an unknown tannin mixture permeating its fibers, a recipe lost to history that somehow repelled insects and moisture alike. This wasn't just vellum, it was armor crafted to endure the sweaty grip of a smuggler's hand or the damp chill of a ship's hold. The ink tells an even richer story. Spectral analysis detected flecks of lapis lazuli, a pigment so costly it was reserved for illuminating sacred texts blended with common oak gall. This paradoxical pairing speaks volumes. The map's creators wanted durability without drawing attention. That blue wasn't for beauty, it was functional, resisting fading better than cheaper pigments. Someone paid a fortune to ensure these lines stayed legible for generations. Then there's the handwriting. At least 7 distinct scripts intersect on these pages, some precise as a monk's copyist hand, others jagged like notes scrawled in haste. One section near the Baltic coast shifts abruptly from Latin to Gothic cipher, then to what scholars now recognize as a variant of Rotoka's, a rare merchant shorthand from the Hanseatic League. This wasn't the work of a single cartographer holed up in a scriptorium. It was a collaborative effort, updated in real time by agents scattered across trade routes. You can almost trace their movements, the elegant quill strokes of a Venetian scholar giving way to the hurried glyphs of a courier fresh from the steppes, each contributor layering intelligence like strata in sedimentary rock. The most telling detail, the patches. Infrared imaging reveals dozens of microscopic stitch holes where sections were carefully removed and replaced, likely by later users correcting outdated intelligence or purging compromised routes. This wasn't a static reference tool, it was a living entity evolving with the clandestine networks it documented. The parchment's edges bear tiny notches too, suggesting it was once part of a larger set, perhaps bundled with coded ledgers or sealed dispatches. So who bankrolled such an enterprise? The lapis lazuli alone would have cost more than a castle's annual upkeep. The answer may lie in the parchment's chain of custody. Traces of mercury used in medieval gold refining cling to one corner, hinting at a patron with ties to minting or bullion trade. Combine that with the Hanseatic ciphers, and the profile emerges, a consortium of merchant princes pooling resources to protect their monopoly. Because in the end, this wasn't just a map. It was the ultimate trade secret, a weapon disguised as parchment, its value measured not in ink but in the silences between the lines. Legends whispered in the taverns near the monastery tell of a parchment so dangerous, it was said to be penned with ink mixed with the ashes of a hanged thief. They called it the Devil's Chart, a map that didn't just guide travelers but ensnared them. One tale speaks of a merchant who, after stealing a glance at its symbols, woke to find his prized stallions dead in their stables, their hooves worn to stubs as if they'd galloped 1,000 miles in the night. Another recounts a scholar who translated just 3 of its cryptic phrases before vanishing, his chambers left filled with the scent of salt and sulfur. But here's the twist, these stories aren't medieval. They sprouted centuries after the map's creation, stitched together from fragments of older, darker folklore. The curse likely began with something far more mundane: greed. In the 1700s, a French antiquarian named Lefebvre died under mysterious circumstances shortly after announcing he decoded part of the map. His notes were burned, but not before rumors spread that he'd uncovered a secret route to a lost silver mine. Coincidence, perhaps, yet within a year, 3 more men who'd handled the map met grim fates. One drowned in a shallow creek, another choked on a piece of bread, a third simply walked into the woods and never returned. The pattern is too convenient to ignore. In an era when knowledge was power, silencing those who knew too much wouldn't require supernatural forces, just a well-placed knife or a bribed servant. The curse might have been a smokescreen, a way to deter curiosity. After all, what better protection for a secret than a reputation that makes men fear to look too closely? Yet the most compelling clue lies in the timing. The curse stories surged every time the map resurfaced during political upheavals, the 30 Years' War, the Napoleonic invasions. Coincidentally, these were also periods when trade routes became battlegrounds, and controlling information meant controlling fortunes, the devil's handiwork. More likely the work of rivals who stood to lose everything if the map's secrets came to light. but folklore always hides a kernel of truth. The map's symbols do seem to carry an eerie weight. Take the inverted cross near the Swiss border, long dismissed as a cartographer's error until a 19th century dig uncovered a mass grave beneath the spot, filled with skeletons bearing the telltale wounds of medieval assassins. Or the recurring owl motif, later linked to a shadowy guild of night couriers who moved contraband under cover of darkness. The curses might have been fabrications, but the dangers they represented were all too real. So why do these myths persist? Because they serve a purpose. The stories transform the map from a mere tool into something alive, something with agency. A cursed object is easier to blame than the messy, human truths of betrayal and greed. And that's the real magic here, not in the parchment, but in the way it holds up a mirror to our own fears. The devil didn't need to write this map, we did. That delicate serpent and dagger symbol etched into the medieval parchment, it didn't vanish with the Middle Ages. Centuries later, the same mark appears in the margins of a 16th century Portuguese portolan chart, this time tucked beside a newly discovered trade route to the Indies. The connection isn't accidental. When cartographers like Diogo Homem drafted their famed sea atlases, they weren't just drawing coastlines, they were inheriting a clandestine tradition. Look closely at these Renaissance maps, and you'll spot subtle nods to their medieval predecessor. Inverted compass roses near contested waters, cryptic abbreviations where pirate havens once flourished. The old tricks hadn't died, they'd simply evolved. Military strategists were the quickest students. When the Venetian Republic commissioned its first classified battlefield maps in the 1500s, they didn't just depict terrain, they layered it with the same visual codes the medieval map had perfected. A grove of trees might indicate ambush points. A winding path's thickness could signal troop capacity. Even Napoleon's generals later adopted these techniques, using innocuous flourishes to mark supply caches in their campaign maps. The medieval obsession with secrecy had birthed a new cartographic language, one where every stroke could conceal as much as it revealed. Modern intelligence agencies recognize this legacy. At Langley and Vauxhall Cross, analysts study the map not as a relic, but as a masterclass in operational security. Its blend of precision and misdirection mirrors contemporary methods for disguising sensitive sites in satellite imagery, a practice as old as those smudged annotations near 14th century Genoa. Even the digital age hasn't rendered its lessons obsolete. When cyber cartographers encrypt geospatial data today, they're echoing the same principle medieval scribes grasped. True power lies not in hiding the map, but in controlling who can read it. Yet the most profound influence might be philosophical. Modern mapmakers grappling with ethical dilemmas, how much to reveal in crisis zones, how to balance transparency with security, are facing the same quandaries that haunted the medieval parchment's creators. When a disaster relief map omits unstable bridges, or a climate survey highlights vulnerable regions, they're walking that ancient tightrope between utility and risk. The medieval map's genius was recognizing that every line drawn is a choice, and every omission, however well-intentioned, alters the world it claims to represent. So what's the takeaway for today's cartographers? Perhaps it's this: maps have never been neutral. Whether inked on vellum or rendered in pixels, they're living artifacts of human intention, shaped by the fears, ambitions, and secrets of their makers. The medieval map's greatest gift wasn't its hidden routes or ciphers. It was the uncomfortable truth it forces us to confront, that every map, no matter how scientific, is ultimately a story. And the most dangerous stories are the ones we mistake for fact. The most explosive secrets on this map aren't the hidden trade routes, they're the invisible fault lines of medieval power. Take the jagged path cutting through the Pyrenees, marked with a single chilling phrase: sanguinem debitum, blood debt. For years, historians puzzled over the sudden conflict between Aragon and Navarre in 1284, a war seemingly sparked by nothing more than a petty border dispute. But this notation tells a different story. The trail leads straight to a valley where Aragon's forces ambushed Navarre's silver shipments for months, disguised as bandit raids. That blood debt wasn't poetic, it was literal. The map's creator knew the truth. Navarre's subsequent invasion wasn't about territory. It was revenge for stolen bullion, a secret theft exposed only by this parchment. Then there's the Baltic powder keg. A cluster of routes near Riga bear tiny black crescents, a symbol later linked to the Teutonic Knights intelligence network. These paths bypassed traditional checkpoints, funneling weapons and mercenaries into Livonia during its rebellion against Danish rule. Contemporary chronicles blamed the uprising on peasant unrest, but the map's annotations tell a darker tale. One coded entry near Vilnius reads, Ferrum et Fides, Iron and Faith, likely referencing the Knights' covert arms deals with Lithuanian pagans, their supposed enemies. The revelation, this holy order wasn't just fighting infidels, they were arming them to weaken Christian rivals. Small wonder the region blazed with conflict for decades. But the map's most devastating impact might have been the wars it prevented. The absence of certain routes speaks volumes. No paths thread through Burgundy during its 15-year truce with France, not because they didn't exist, but because the map's owners had a vested interest in peace. Grain shipments from Dijon to Paris flowed uninterrupted, enriching the same merchant families who likely commissioned this document. Meanwhile, a single smudged line along the Rhine hints at a vulnerability, a stretch where the river could be forded in winter. Had the Holy Roman Emperor known, he might have pressed his advantage against France. Instead, the secret died with the parchment until now. What emerges isn't just a record of conflicts, but a blueprint for how medieval power truly functioned. Kingdoms didn't just clash over crowns and crusades, they fought for control of the unmarked trails where wealth and weapons moved unseen. The map's genius was in its omissions. By leaving certain routes blank, its creators didn't just hide knowledge. They shaped history itself, steering armies toward some battles and away from others with nothing more than a well-placed gap in the vellum. Diplomacy wasn't conducted in throne rooms alone. It was etched in these invisible lines where the right whisper could start a war or buy a century of peace. And that's the unsettling truth lurking beneath the ink. We've always assumed medieval wars were fought over glory or God. But this map suggests something far more pragmatic. Most conflicts began not with a trumpet's blast, but with a merchant's ledger and the quiet stroke of a pen marking who had something to lose. The delicate ink strokes marking heretic paths on the map tell a story far darker than mere geography. These faint, almost apologetic lines trace through the most unforgiving landscapes. Swampy marshlands north of Toulouse where Cathar Perfect once slipped between patrols, or the jagged Pyrenean passes where Jewish families vanished into the mist under cover of night. What's chilling isn't just their existence but their precision. One such route near Montségur avoids every known royal garrison, instead weaving through shepherds' trails only locals would recognize. This wasn't guesswork. Whoever charted these paths had inside knowledge of both the hunters and the hunted. Religious persecution created a lucrative shadow economy, and the map's creators knew it. A telling cluster of symbols surrounds the Languedoc region, not just escape routes, but pricing codes. Cross-referencing Inquisition records reveals these markings align with payments made to boatmen on the Aude River, who ferried Cathars to safety for a fee. The going rate, 20 silver livres per head, roughly a year's wages for a craftsman, but the real profit lay in resale. Some heretic paths double as smuggling corridors for Catalan wine, suggesting merchants moved contraband and people in the same covert trips. Faith and profit weren't just intertwined, they fueled each other. Yet the map's most damning evidence lies in its silences. While it meticulously charts Cathar escape networks, the routes for Jewish refugees are conspicuously sparse, except near major banking centers. Around Frankfurt and Toledo, previously overlooked annotations in faded red ink match known locations of clandestine moneylenders. This wasn't altruism, it was financial pragmatism. Persecuted Jews with capital could buy protection, while poor Cathars were left to the marshes. The map exposes a brutal hierarchy even among the oppressed. What does this reveal about medieval espionage? That faith was often a smokescreen. When a Cistercian monk appears in the margins near Avignon, his hooded figure isn't there to bless travelers. Church records identify him as Brother Arnaud, a collector of tithes who secretly brokered safe passage for wealthy heretics for a percentage of their confiscated estates. The real heresy wasn't theological. It was the Church's own agents playing both sides, using persecution to line their pockets while pretending to stamp out dissent. The map's genius was its neutrality. By serving persecuted groups without endorsing them, its creators turned morality into a commodity. Those heretic paths weren't drawn out of compassion. They were supply lines in a hidden war where faith was the battlefield, and survival was the only ideology that mattered. In the end, the parchment's most subversive message isn't about geography, it's about power. Because in the Middle Ages, holiness was negotiable, but profit, that was sacred. Among the map's most enigmatic symbols, a cluster near the Harz Mountains stands out, not for its geographic significance, but for its uncanny resemblance to alchemical sigils from the era. At first glance, the looping lines and dotted circles look like mere decorative flourishes, but compare them to manuscripts from the workshop of Albertus Magnus, and the connection becomes undeniable. These aren't random scribbles, they're coded references to metallurgical processes, likely pointing to veins of cobalt or antimony, metals crucial for crafting the hardened steel that gave certain armies an edge in battle. One particularly intricate symbol matches a cipher used by 13th century smiths in Toledo, where the secret of Damascus steel was allegedly reverse-engineered from Islamic blades. But the real revelation lies in what these markings imply about the map's broader purpose. Near the Alps, a sequence of symbols forms what scholars now recognize as an early chemical notation, a recipe for Greek fire, the napalm-like weapon that Byzantine ships used to torch entire fleets. The ingredients listed: crude oil from the Black Sea, quicklime from Cyprus, align exactly with cargo manifests from Venetian galleys that mysteriously vanished en route to Constantinople. This wasn't just a trade map, it was a smuggler's guide to the most dangerous knowledge of the age, disguised as innocuous terrain markers. Even more startling are the mechanical clues. A series of interconnected circles near Nuremberg mirrors designs from the notebooks of Villard de Honnecourt, the medieval engineer whose sketches included everything from siege engines to perpetual motion machines. One symbol, a wheel with inward curving spokes, matches a patent filed centuries later by Leonardo da Vinci for a frictionless bearing. Was this an idea circulating among guilds long before the Renaissance claimed it as innovation? The map suggests a shadow network of inventors sharing breakthroughs under the radar of church and crown. Then there's the mine. Deep in the Carpathians, a single symbol shows a mountain cleft by lightning, with tiny runes reading Ignis Metallum, a fire metal. Archaeologists recently surveyed the area and found slag heaps consistent with medieval tungsten extraction. Tungsten, when alloyed with iron, creates a metal nearly as hard as diamond, something medieval swordsmiths couldn't have known unless they'd stumbled upon it by accident. The implications are staggering. If even a fraction of these symbols preserve lost metallurgical techniques, they could rewrite the history of technology. What's chilling is how carefully this knowledge was guarded. Some alchemical notations are deliberately incomplete, missing crucial steps like the temperature or quenching medium needed to replicate the process. This wasn't carelessness, it was sabotage by design. The map's creators understood that true power lay not in sharing secrets, but in holding just enough back to ensure no rival could ever catch up. So was this parchment a repository of lost innovations, without question. But more than that, it was a battleground, one where science and subterfuge colluded to shape the fate of empires. Every symbol wasn't just information. It was a weapon waiting centuries for the right hand to wield it. The phrase, "the Lady of the Harbor," scrawled in the map's margins sounds like a romantic epithet until you trace it to the bustling docks of 14th century Bruges. There, records from the Hanseatic League's secret ledgers mention a woman known only as Vrouw van de Stroom, Lady of the Tide, a broker who could make entire shipments vanish from customs logs with a flick of her quill. She wasn't some mythical figure. She was a linchpin in a shadow economy where women, often dismissed as mere tavern keepers or merchants' wives, pulled the strings of espionage with terrifying precision. What made women so effective? In a world where men dominated official trade, female spies operated in the blind spots of power. A noblewoman's embroidery circle could double as an intelligence network, with coded messages stitched into tapestries. A midwife moving between households carried more than herbs. She transported secrets about pregnancies that could destabilize dynasties. The map's annotations hint at this hidden workforce. A crescent moon symbol near Genoa aligns with the travels of a spice merchant's widow who negotiated unusually favorable tariffs, while a rose doodled beside Avignon marks the home of a papal scribe's mistress, later exposed as a conduit for intercepted letters. But the real genius lay in societal expectations. While guards searched merchants for contraband, who would suspect the veiled woman selling ale at the docks? In Bruges, the Lady of the Harbor allegedly used her lace imports to smuggle encrypted messages, hiding ciphers in the intricate patterns. Elsewhere, Beguine's semi-monastic women who lived in self-governing communities acted as couriers, their religious garb granting them immunity from search. The map's warnings about certain convents, silentium hic, silence here, now read less as piety and more as tradecraft, yet their influence came at a cost. Male spies caught in treason might face execution, but women risked far worse: accusations of witchcraft, sexual slander, or being erased from records altogether. That's why the map's scant references to female operatives are so revelatory. A single initial, M, beside a Sicilian trade route matches a case from the Spanish archives. Maria of Palermo, a silk dealer who fed intelligence to both Aragonese and Angevin rulers until she disappeared into the sea, likely murdered by a rival faction. The parchment preserves what chroniclers erased, proof that medieval espionage wasn't just a man's game. The map's greatest irony, the very biases that made women effective spies also ensured their stories were buried. While kings and merchants jostled for credit, the ladies of the harbor worked in purposeful obscurity, their triumphs encoded not in treaties but in the gaps between the lines. Today, as historians painstakingly reconstruct their networks from fragments like this map, one truth emerges: the medieval world turned on secrets, and no one kept them better than the women the world refused to see. The map's survival through 7 centuries of war, fire, and deliberate purges is nothing short of miraculous, but the real miracle lies in the fingerprints left behind. One of the earliest traces surfaces in the musty inventory of a Burgundian duke's library, catalogued between a psalter and a treatise on falconry as a certain nautical chart with curious marks. The description is deliberately vague, a common tactic for items too sensitive to name. Just decades later, it reappears in the log of a Catalan privateer, listed among spoils taken from a Venetian galley, except this time the entry specifies one vellum of secret ways to be shown only to the patron. The contrast is telling. What nobles disguised as trivial, pirates recognized as treasure. Each transfer left its mark, sometimes literally. Infrared scans reveal where a 15th century hand scraped away annotations near the Danube, likely to obscure routes used during the Hussite Wars. Yet beneath those erasures, older symbols persist. A tiny ship doodled beside roads hints at Hospitaller knights using the map to coordinate naval raids, while a smear of red wax near Cadiz matches the seal of a notorious Barbary corsair. This wasn't just passing ownership, it was an ongoing conversation across time, where every user contributed to the map's evolving cipher, the most enigmatic guardian. A German alchemist whose signature appears in silver ink near Prague, Johann of Sars, known for supplying Emperor Rudolf II with mechanical curiosities, likely used the map's metallurgical symbols to source rare ores. But his real contribution was the protective spell, or so he claimed, scrawled along the margins. This chart is shielded by the gaze of Mercury, whether superstition or tradecraft, it worked. When Swedish troops sacked Prague in 1648, they burned entire libraries, yet spared this single, enchanted document, depositing it unread in the loot sent to Queen Christina's court. Why did such a dangerous artifact survive when so many others were destroyed? Because its value outweighed its risk. For a Medici banker, it might mean evading tariffs that could bankrupt a rival. For a Tudor spymaster, it revealed which ports could safely land agents. Even the Church, despite its censors, preserved a copy. Vatican archives confirm a tabula prohibita, matching this map's dimensions, was locked in the Castel Sant'Angelo for centuries, accessed only during papal succession crises. Knowledge this potent wasn't something you burned. It was something you hid until the moment demanded it. The last pre-modern owner left the most poignant mark, a wine stain blooming across the Black Sea like a bloodstain. Marginalia identifies him as a Greek merchant fleeing Ottoman conquest in the 1400s. His final note, half-faded, reads, Epsilon, Lambda Pi, O to Delta Alpha, hope. Perhaps he thought the map could save him. Or perhaps he knew some secrets outlive even empires, because when archivists rediscovered the parchment in a Vienna attic in 1897, that stain had become a compass, leading scholars straight to the lost trade networks of a world everyone else had forgotten. So who were its true guardians? Not kings or conquerors, but the desperate, the cunning, and the far-sighted, those who understood that maps don't just record geography. They outlast it. The same ultraviolet scanners that uncovered hidden layers in Van Gogh's paintings have now peeled back centuries from this medieval parchment. Multispectral imaging, a technique developed for space telescopes, revealed ghostly traces of ink long faded to the naked eye. Beneath the map's visible routes, a second network emerged, faint lines snaking through the Alps, their trajectories matching smugglers' accounts from Inquisition trials. But the real shock came when researchers applied algorithmic enhancement. Letters thought to be random smudges resolved into names, not of places but people. One cluster near Bordeaux spelled out Jean Le Bateleur, a known alias for a 14th century mercenary captain who moonlighted as a passport forger. Another near Cologne simply read Der Falk, the Falcon, a moniker, linked to a shadowy financier who bankrolled both sides of the 100 Years' War. AI translation tools cracked what human scholars couldn't. The Ciphers' complexity, mixing Latin acronyms, merchant shorthand, and numeric substitutions, proved no match for machine learning models trained on thousands of medieval manuscripts. Phrases dismissed as pious doodles were actually encrypted supply lists. Roman 12 libras piperis, 12 pounds of pepper beside a coastal cave in Dalmatia, or ferrum Norvegicum, Norwegian iron along an unmarked Baltic trail. Each decoded phrase exposed another link in a supply chain that circumvented kings, bishops, and guilds alike. The most chilling revelation, a single abbreviation, SV, repeated near border crossings. Cross-referencing archives revealed it stood for sign voce, without voice, marking routes where guards could be bribed to look the other way. Permanently, but the map's secrets aren't just spilling from its ink. LiDAR scans of terrain along its hidden paths uncovered physical evidence. Ancient wagon ruts in Bohemian forests matching the parchment's detours, or collapsed tunnels beneath Marseille that once allowed goods to bypass the city's extortionate tariffs. Even climate data plays a role. Dendrochronology shows timber from smuggler way stations dates to years of famine, suggesting these routes became lifelines when crops failed. The parchment isn't just a guide, it's a living record of desperation and ingenuity. What's left to uncover? Quantum imaging could reveal subsurface writing in the vellum's untested areas, while blockchain analysis might trace the map's ownership through coded financial records. But the ultimate mystery isn't technological, it's human, because every erased name, every vanished route represents a choice. Someone, somewhere, decided this knowledge was too dangerous to survive. And yet, against all odds, it did, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right light to shine. Unfurling this map's secrets isn't just an academic exercise, it's an ethical minefield. Consider the delicate annotations near Granada, where a faded family crest matches the lineage of a prominent Spanish diplomat. Modern descendants, unaware of their ancestors' role in smuggling arms to Moorish rebels, now hold positions of public trust. Revealing this could unravel careers built on centuries of carefully curated reputation. Yet, isn't there equal harm in silencing history? When archaeologists debated publishing a similar document in the 1990s, they discovered notes implicating a Baltic merchant family in the slave trade, a revelation that sparked violent protests from relatives who claimed the stains of the past shouldn't dictate the present. The dilemma cuts deeper than personal legacies. Entire nations grapple with the map's geopolitical ghosts. One contested route through the Balkans follows the exact path of a 14th century massacre, its victims buried beneath what's now a UNESCO heritage site. Local communities, having built their identity around narratives of resilience, fiercely resist any suggestion their ancestors might have been complicit. Historians argue truth shouldn't bow to comfort, but when that truth risks reigniting ethnic tensions, the stakes turn perilous. After all, the map doesn't just describe borders, it redraws them in ink stained with blood and betrayal. Then there's the matter of living traditions. Certain symbols near Uppsala align with still practiced Norse pagan rituals, their origins previously believed to be purely mythological. Publishing these connections could lend legitimacy to marginalized groups, or expose them to persecution from authorities who have long denied their historical roots. It's a paradox. The same document that could empower some might weaponize history against others. Perhaps the sharpest irony lies in the custodianship of the map itself. The monastery that preserved it for centuries was founded with wealth from the very smuggling routes the parchment exposes. Does revealing that truth honor the monks' scholarly legacy or betray their confidence? There are no easy answers, only the uneasy realization that every act of disclosure is also an act of erasure, rewriting some stories while silencing others. The map's greatest lesson might be this: history isn't just about what we remember, it's about who gets to decide what's worth forgetting. The techniques scribbled onto this medieval parchment wouldn't feel out of place in a modern intelligence briefing. Take the map's deliberate misinformation, those false compass roses pointing travelers toward bandit ambushes. Today's cyber operatives deploy nearly identical tactics, seeding fake server addresses in dark web forums to lure hackers into digital kill boxes. Or consider the Silentium Aurum warning near Genoa, a medieval equivalent of today's need-to-know compartmentalization, where field agents are given just enough information to complete a mission without compromising the broader network. The parallels aren't coincidental, they're evolutionary. Modern handlers recruiting assets in hostile territories still use the same principles as those medieval spice traders who identified corruptible toll collectors. A 13th century merchant might slip a guardsman's silver to ignore an extra mule laden with silk, while a 21st century case officer bribes a customs official with cryptocurrency to bypass a shipment inspection. The tools have upgraded, but the human vulnerabilities remain unchanged. Even the map's cryptic symbols find their echo in contemporary spycraft. Think of the innocuous-looking graffiti used by Russian sleeper agents in the United States before their 2010 arrest, signaling safe houses and dead drops in plain sight. What's most striking are the secure routes, those unmarked mountain passes and underground tunnels. Today's equivalents aren't carved through rock but through bandwidth, encrypted VPNs, satellite relays, and mesh networks that bypass government surveillance. The medieval map's creators would instantly recognize Tor network nodes as the digital descendants of their hidden way stations. Both systems rely on the same core insight, that movement is power, and controlling the paths of information shapes empires. Yet the parchment holds warnings too. Its erased sections reveal how over-reliance on fixed routes became a liability when wars shifted geography. Modern intelligence agencies face the same trap, investing billions in satellite surveillance while losing the human networks that once noticed a suspicious cargo truck or an unusual fishing boat. The map's greatest lesson might be its balance, combining geographic precision with adaptive tradecraft, a reminder that no technology replaces the need to understand the terrain, whether it's a mountain pass or a social media platform. Perhaps that's why agencies from Langley to Moscow still study medieval networks, because while drones can map a village from space, they'll never spot the local innkeeper who knows which cellars connect her, just as the map's creators did 8 centuries ago. The faces and tools have changed, but the game, it's still played on the same board. Imagine opening your laptop and dragging your cursor along the exact path a 13th century spice smuggler took through the Alps, seeing the same jagged peaks he navigated by moonlight, now rendered in crisp satellite imagery. That's the magic of the Digital Medieval Trade Project, an interactive platform that overlays this rediscovered map onto modern terrain. Zoom in on the Swiss-Italian border, and you'll spot the ghostly outline of a vanished mountain pass, its cobblestones now buried under 6 centuries of landslides. Toggle to street view near Marseille, and the harbor's medieval quays materialize beneath today's cruise ship docks, revealing where illicit Venetian glass once slipped past customs. It's history you don't just read, you traverse, but the real innovation is the decoding challenge. Hover over a serpent and dagger symbol near the Baltic coast, and a pop-up transforms your screen into a spy's workstation. A digitized ledger of coded shipping manifests waits to be cracked using the same cipher techniques medieval merchants used. Succeed, and you'll unlock the hidden cargo amber smuggled as fishing weights, or Hanseatic silver disguised as pilgrim donations. The game's genius is its authenticity. Every puzzle is pulled straight from recovered trade disputes or Inquisition testimony. You're not just learning about espionage, you're rehearsing it. Yet some scholars bristle at the project's playful approach, reducing centuries of nuanced economic warfare to a point, and click adventure risks flattening history into a series of aha moments. Take the bandit ambush markers along the Rhine. The game presents them as obstacles to avoid, but archives tell a darker story. Many bandits were actually rival merchants paying thugs to sabotage competitors. The messy reality of medieval trade involved not just cunning but coercion. Can an app really capture that complexity when its interface demands tidy solutions? Others argue the opposite, that interactivity reveals depths textbooks can't. Tracing the map's alternate routes in real time exposes patterns invisible on parchment. Notice how often smuggler paths hug riverbanks. That's not just stealth, it's acoustic engineering. Water masks the creak of wagon wheels, a trick modern cartographers would miss. The project's crowdsourcing feature has even corrected historical assumptions. When users flagged odd detours through Burgundy, researchers cross-checked flood records and discovered these were seasonal workarounds for roads that turned to bogs each spring. Suddenly, the map's illogical zigzags made perfect sense. Still, the debate lingers. Does democratizing history dilute it? When a teenager in Tokyo decodes a Genos cipher in minutes, something that took medieval spies years to master, are they grasping the stakes? Or is the value precisely in that accessibility? After all, the original map wasn't meant for scholars in ivory towers. It was a living tool, grimy with the fingerprints of people who needed it to survive. Maybe seeing it through their eyes, not as a relic, but as a lifeline, is the most honest way to honor its legacy. The final twist, the digital map itself has become a target. Hackers recently breached its servers not to vandalize, but to add a new layer, modern smuggling routes superimposed over the old. The message was clear, the game hasn't ended. It's just Chinese letter players. The map's weathered edges and cryptic symbols have fueled wild speculation for centuries. Treasure hunters swearing it leads to lost Templar gold, conspiracy theorists decoding proof of Atlantis in its coastal contours. But here's the inconvenient truth. The real revelations aren't hidden in arcane symbols or fantastical legends. They're tucked between mundane notes about bribes paid to a customs officer in Marseille, or the going rate for bribing a Rhine toll keeper. That scribble in the margin, not a clue to El Dorado, but a merchant's dry calculation. 2 silver marks to the night watchman, and the wool passes unweighed. The map's true power lies in these unglamorous details, the bureaucratic grease that kept the medieval world turning. Why do we chase ghosts when the paperwork tells a richer story? Perhaps because it's easier to fantasize about buried chests than confront the messy reality of how power actually worked. Take the infamous Templar treasure myth. While novels spin tales of gold-laden catacombs, the map shows something far more subversive. A network of grain warehouses in Champagne, where Templar bankers moved wealth not in glittering coins, but in IOUs and ledger entries. Their real treasure wasn't hidden. It was laundered through trade deals and loans right under kings' noses. The parchment's most damning evidence, a tiny notation near Paris listing interest rates charged to the French crown. No chests of gold could buy the leverage these bankers held. Then there's the Atlantis obsession. Scholars have wasted decades squinting at the map's Atlantic coastlines, searching for phantom islands. Meanwhile, they overlooked the real marvel, an accurately charted current system along the Iberian Peninsula, annotated with sailing times that shaved weeks off spice runs. The mystery wasn't mythical continents, it was how ordinary sailors harnessed oceanography to outmaneuver monopolies. One captain's scribbled tip, "Ride the tide at moonrise," saved more fortunes than any fabled city ever could. The irony, by fixating on conspiracies, we've ignored the map's revolutionary honesty. While official chronicles glorified kings and popes, this parchment recorded the quiet collusion that made their rule possible. That smudged line connecting Lyon to Geneva isn't a secret tunnel, it's evidence of a tax collector taking kickbacks to underreport wine shipments. The real conspiracy wasn't hidden in code. It was happening in broad daylight, in the unsealed letters and handshake deals that historians long dismissed as trivial. So why the romanticism? Maybe because admitting the truth feels too familiar. A merchant bribing an official isn't exotic, it's uncomfortably modern. We'd rather imagine medieval Europe as a world of grand quests and holy relics than recognize it as a mirror reflecting our own grey compromises. But the map refuses to indulge that fantasy. Its stains aren't dragon's blood, their wine spills from late-night deal-making. Its faded ink doesn't spell doom, it logs the price of corruption. And that, in the end, is far more revealing than any treasure map, because the greatest secret the parchment exposes isn't about the past, it's about how little human nature has changed. The torn corner of the map isn't just damage, it's a silent scream. A deliberate act of historical vandalism. Infrared imaging reveals ghostly letters trailing off the edge of the tier, the ink abruptly severed as if someone couldn't erase the words fast enough. The fragments left behind are maddeningly incomplete, a looping G, what might be an A, and the faintest curve of what could be an R, Garzon, Galicia. The speculation is endless, but one thing's certain, whatever stood there was dangerous enough to warrant destruction. The tier itself tells a story. Microscopic analysis shows the vellum was cut with a sharp, narrow blade, likely a scribe's knife, not torn haphazardly. Someone knew exactly what they were removing. Even more telling, the missing fragment's shape. Unlike the map's other worn edges, this tier curves deliberately around a cluster of symbols near the Adriatic coast, sparing them while excising whatever name or route once connected them. This wasn't random censorship, it was surgical precision, as if the remover feared disturbing nearby secrets while targeting one explosive detail. Then there's the timing. The vellum's fraying suggests the tear occurred centuries ago, but the ink smudges along the edges indicate frantic handling shortly afterward, perhaps by someone trying to read the severed clues before they faded. A stain near the damage matches the chemical signature of 17th century sealing wax, hinting at a noble family's desperate attempt to conceal their ancestors' involvement in Byzantine-era smuggling. The map's layers of secrecy aren't just medieval, they accumulated like sediment, each generation adding its own cover-up. But the real mystery isn't just what was lost, it's why this particular piece threatened its keepers. Cross-referencing the intact symbols near the tier reveals a possible motive. They mark a network of caves along the Dalmatian coast, historically used by pirates and salt smugglers. If the missing fragment named a specific cove or collaborator, it could have exposed living descendants to scandal or even legal claims over loot hidden generations ago. In 2014, a diver exploring those very caves found 13th century Venetian ducats wedged in a fissure, their placement too deliberate to be shipwreck scatter. Coincidence or proof the map's secret wasn't just political but financial? The most haunting possibility, the tier wasn't about hiding a place but a person. That looping G could point to Gattilusio, the Genos dynasty that controlled the Aegean's most lucrative smuggling routes. One branch of the family was exterminated in 1500 after Ottoman archives revealed their double dealing with both Christian and Muslim powers. Was this corner torn to protect their legacy or to bury proof of their betrayal? Until someone unearths that missing fragment, we're left with its echo, a void shaped like a secret, and the uneasy sense that some truths weren't meant to survive. But here's the twist: sometimes absence speaks louder than ink, because in the end, the map's most powerful lesson isn't about what it shows, it's about what someone somewhere was terrified to let us see. The forgotten map doesn't just belong to the past, it whispers to the present. Every smuggler's detour, every coded symbol, every erased name forces us to confront a timeless truth. Power doesn't always shout from castle walls. Sometimes it slithers through unmarked mountain passes, hides in the margins of ledgers, or waits patiently in the hands of a merchant who knows which official to bribe. This parchment is more than a relic. It's a mirror reflecting the dark ingenuity that still shapes our world. Think about it. When modern corporations exploit tax loopholes or nations wage cyber warfare, they're playing by a rulebook written centuries ago. The tools have changed: silicon chips instead of wax seals, algorithms instead of alchemical ciphers, but the game remains the same. What makes the map so unsettling isn't just its secrets, but their sheer mundanity. There's no grand conspiracy here, no shadowy cabal pulling strings, just ordinary people, traders, monks, soldiers, making ruthless choices to survive in a system rigged against them. A wine stain on the parchment might mark the spot where a customs officer took his cut. A smudged route could trace the path of a desperate family fleeing persecution. These aren't the stories that make it into chronicles or epic poems. They're the quiet betrayals and small victories that history usually forgets, unless a fragile piece of vellum survives to remind us. And that's the real treasure, not lost gold or Templar relics, but the proof that even in an age we dismiss as simple or superstitious, people were just as cunning, just as flawed, just as human as we are. The map's greatest revelation: the Middle Ages weren't a time of noble knights and damsels in distress. They were a knife fight in a dark alley, where the winners weren't always the strongest, just the ones who knew which corners to cut. So why does this matter now? Because history isn't a dead thing. It's a compass. Every time we uncover a hidden route or crack a medieval cipher, we're not just solving an ancient puzzle, we're learning to recognize the same patterns in our own world. When you see a shipping container mysteriously rerouted or a stock market anomaly that defies explanation, you're witnessing the legacy of those 13th century merchants who first realized that the best way to win isn't to break the rules, but to rewrite them when no one's looking. The map's final lesson might be its simplest: truth isn't always buried. Sometimes it's tucked between the pages of a ledger, scrawled on the back of a prayer book, or hidden in plain sight on a piece of parchment labeled nautical chart. All it takes is someone willing to look closer, to question the gaps, the smudges, the empty spaces where the real story lies. So the next time you hear about a lost manuscript or a rediscovered artifact, ask yourself, what secrets is it keeping? And more importantly, who wanted them to stay hidden? As for the map itself, its journey isn't over. Every scan, every translation, every fresh pair of eyes brings us closer to the full story. But here's the tantalizing part: we'll never know if we've found all its secrets. Maybe the next breakthrough will come from a grad student working late in a dusty archive. Maybe it'll be you pausing this video to squint at a symbol that doesn't quite fit. Because history isn't just something we study, it's something we uncover, one clue at a time. And if a single piece of parchment can rewrite our understanding of an entire era, imagine what else might be waiting to be found. The only question left is this: what will you discover next?